Welcome to today's Explainer. We are doing something completely different today. We're flipping the script on human evolution. We're going to bridge the gap between speculative fiction, hard science, and social dynamics to fundamentally rethink what we call glitches. Seriously, prepare to look at your own so-called imperfections in a completely new light. Let's get right into it.
So, let's dive into a concept that kind of challenges everything we know about normalcy. You know how society absolutely loves to categorize our cognitive, sensory, or metabolic deviations as just, well, glitches? Like they're bugs in the human code that need fixing. But what if that feeling of being an outsider, of being somewhat broken, is actually the precursor to architecting an entirely new realm of consciousness? Think about it. What if these imbalances are literally the exact raw materials required for profound metaphysical evolution?
To really grasp this, we first need to look at the fictional narrative Saga of the Evolve. Here, our protagonist, Victor Matsuyama, is trapped in this perfectly peaceful but just agonizingly boring world. And honestly, this stagnation acts like a psychological pressure cooker. Victor's deep obsession with advanced mechanics and his innermost desire for evolutionary change, it aggressively pushes back against this completely mundane reality.
And this desire for change, it doesn't just stay in his head. It violently manifests into reality. It starts off subtly, just these needle-like rooftop chills and some psychic pressure. But then it escalates into a piercing auditory ring that heralds a literal cyborg ambush. I mean, out of this pure chaos, a physical manifestation of his subconscious scientific aspirations is synthesized. This plunges him into a shared cognitive dizziness, a resonance trance that primes him to literally jump across the multiverse.
Which brings us to the archetype mindset. Victor uses something called the SMRD, the Scientific Multi-Realm Transport Device. Originally designed by Ryosuke Fonsana, it's a localized quantum field hyperdrive system meant to bridge parallel dimensions. It is the ultimate metaphor for personal agency, right? It's about looking at a twisted, boring world, grabbing the tools of science, and literally building an escape hatch to a hyper-modernized reality.
Okay, but let's bring this down to earth for a second. What if this epic sci-fi concept of multiversal travel and architecting reality actually requires a very real biological power source? If the architect is the engineer who harnesses power to bridge realms, we gotta ask ourselves, where does that energy actually come from in the human body? We are shifting our focus here from the speculative to the clinical, reframing what we often label as biological defects into actual potent forces of disruption.
Because to build a new reality, you absolutely need metabolic energy. Take neurodivergence, for example. For decades, our understanding of conditions like autism has been almost totally held captive by the double helix, focusing exclusively on genetics. But emerging research is pointing toward mitochondrial dysfunction. We're talking about complex abnormalities in the actual energy factories of our cells. It suggests the root cause might actually be far more metabolic than strictly genomic.
Biochemically, this changes everything. We're looking at lactic acid as a vital biochemical marker and seeing how cellular oxidative stress, reactive oxygen species, directly influences behavior. It's opening up these wild new research frontiers, like using India's vast demographic complexity to test these bioenergetics outside traditional Western models. We are transforming a perceived defect into a literal biological battery. This is the raw metabolic power required to fuel an architect.
And what's fascinating is how this idea of biological disruption scales right up into social environments. Let's pivot to another fictional ecosystem, the gilded, highly superficial halls of Ouran Academy. Here, the market-disrupting anomaly is embodied by a character named Uta Lilith, also known as the Onyx Thorn. She's someone who flat-out refuses to play a curated, predictable role in an environment built entirely on fake luxury.
So the Onyx Label isn't just a personality quirk. It is a defensive fortress. Unlike the Academy's traditional archetypes that offer, constant sunshine and sweet talk for amusement, the Onyx Label offers the sophisticated chill of an eclipse. It's built on unyielding stoicism and active exclusion. It deliberately disrupts predictable luxury just to survive in a world that constantly demands a performance.
Just look at the contrast here. On one hand, you have Koya Otori's cool type, which is curated, highly marketable, and meant to be passively consumed within this fragile theater of glass. But the Onyx type is an entirely different beast. It possesses an actual predatory venom. Instead of being a passive product, it's an incalculable variable that actively devours the theater and consumes everything it touches.
To maintain this fortress, she turns high fashion into a literal military-grade sensory shield. We're talking an ombre silk uniform that literally eats light, shifting from midnight black to charcoal mist. A carbon fiber Fujitsu lifebook acting as a digital altar for encrypted networks, and a haptic interface, this heartbeat of cold silicon on her wrist that emits bioluminescent blue or warning crimson pulses. It's high-tech functioning as an external nervous system to protect her boundaries. Which actually brings us to a really profound sensory paradox, one that acts as the ultimate catalyst for human connection. When you completely reject the false symmetry of society, you open yourself up to finding absolute beauty in the never-ending imbalance. This is where two people with intense sensory deviations lock together, not in spite of their deficits, but entirely because of them. Look at the exact reciprocity between Uta and her closest connection, Aras van Clovis. Uta has preternaturally sharp hearing, but she struggles with partial blindness. Aras, on the other hand, possesses violently sharp vision, but entirely lacks hearing. One person's deficit is the exact strength of the other. Together, they navigate their environment as a completely self-contained unit, possessing an empirical attention to reality that perfectly balanced people are just completely blind to. Bonding over Osamu Dazai's melancholic novel, No Longer Human, they lean heavily into this imbalance. She inherently senses that the majority of the world around her is against her, that the world is ugly and colorless. But here is the incredible takeaway. By leaning into this perceived rotten world, rather than desperately seeking a cure to become normal, they forge the absolute purest of connections. Their shared imbalance is their ultimate strength. And when you operate completely outside the normal sensory hierarchy like this, you become an unstoppable, disruptive force. The established system relies on everyone fitting neatly into predictable little boxes. But when you architect your own reality, you fundamentally break those boxes, entirely bypassing the data monopoly. This anomaly completely shatters the system's clinical composure. The data monopoly discovers its prized encrypted archives are fundamentally incomplete. Kyoya realizes his ledger simply has no room for ghosts, and just when the system thinks it finally has the anomaly figured out, the mirror variable drops, Lilith's synchronized twin, Freitas. It proves that true anomalies can't be put into a spreadsheet. They bypass the system because, in their world, a secret never travels alone. Now, architecting your reality is incredibly empowering, but what happens when our biology fails us entirely? Well, sometimes we have to rely on real-world deus ex machina, an external force intervening to resolve a seemingly hopeless situation. In the source text, when the visually impaired protagonists faced a violent intruder, they were saved entirely by Ollie, the family dog. It was a literal canine intervention that stepped in when human biology simply couldn't.
Whether we're relying on external miracles or our own internal bioenergetics, it all comes back to one core principle: Masuta o ragirna, never betray one's architect. Through the deep science of mitochondria, the unyielding stoicism of the onyx thorn, and leaning fully into our perceived sensory defects, we are all answering this ultimate call to radical self-loyalty. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to carry with you today. Knowing that your biological, sensory, and psychological imbalances aren't glitches, but are actually raw, localized metabolic power, what reality will you choose to build? What scientific multi-realm are you architecting in your own life? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating intersection of science and story with me in today's Explainer. Catch you next time.